She murdered her husband in cold blood and felt no regret. But instead of the gallows, she wakes up somewhere impossible. Wonderland. Except this isn't a fairy tale. It's a psychic prison for the criminally insane, where nightmares walk and madness has claws. Two of the most dangerous men in this hellscape immediately claim her as their own. A brilliant psychopath who rules through torture and twisted games, and a shadow creature who can invade her thoughts and her bed. They're fighting a war for control of this realm, and she's the prize they're both willing to kill for. But here's the thing, she didn't survive one monster just to be destroyed by two more. Every 3 months, the weakest prisoners are harvested, transformed into mindless beasts, and she's got 10 weeks before they come for her. To escape, she'll have to play their deadly games, embrace the darkness inside her, and make an impossible choice. Will she break free or become the queen of her own madness? Through the blinding white light, Eleanor felt herself falling, no, floating, through space that seemed to bend and twist around her. The heavy iron chains that had bound her wrists moments ago dissolved like morning mist. The scratchy wool of her prisoner's garb transformed into something lighter, softer, brushing against her skin like silk. When her feet finally touched solid ground, Eleanor opened her eyes. Gone were the dank stone walls of Bedlam, replaced by a vast garden unlike anything she'd ever seen. Flowers, tall as trees, swayed in a non-existent breeze, their petals shimmering with colors that shouldn't exist. The sky above wasn't blue, but a swirling pattern of pastels that made her eyes hurt if she stared too long. "This is a peculiar form of madness," Eleanor mused aloud, her voice steady despite the strangeness surrounding her. She had expected the darkness of an asylum cell, not whatever this was. "Oh, but madness is such a relative term, isn't it?" The voice that had welcomed her seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Some would say it's matter to remain sane in an insane world." Eleanor turned slowly, taking in the impossible landscape. A path of iridescent stones wound through the giant flowers, leading to what appeared to be a forest made of crystal trees. "If this is meant to break my mind, you should know that better men have tried." Her words carried no fear, only the same cold certainty that had guided her hand when she'd finally ended Richard's reign of terror. For years, he had tried to convince her that she was mad, that his cruelty was deserved, that her pain was imagined. But Eleanor knew the truth of her own mind. "Break you?" The voice chuckled, and this time Eleanor could pinpoint its source. A figure emerged from behind one of the massive flower stems, a man, or at least something wearing the shape of one. His skin had a metallic sheen, and his eyes swirled with the same impossible colors as the sky. "My dear Alice, we mean to set you free." "My name is Eleanor," she corrected him, lifting her chin. "Eleanor Ashworth, though I suppose I'll need a new name now that I've killed my husband." The strange being circled her, his movements liquid and unnatural. "Names have power here, and Eleanor carries the weight of your old world. In Wonderland, you can be anyone, anything. Alice is just the beginning." Eleanor's mind, sharp as ever, caught on the familiar word. Wonderland? She'd heard whispers of it, tales told in hushed voices about a realm of magic and madness. But those were children's stories, weren't they? "You expect me to believe I've fallen into a fairy tale?" "I expect you to believe your own eyes," the figure replied. "You've already proven yourself quite capable of that, haven't you? When everyone told you that you were mad, that your husband's violence was all in your head, you trusted your own truth. That's why you're here." A warmth began to build in Eleanor's chest, spreading through her limbs like liquid fire. She looked down at her hands and saw threads of energy dancing between her fingers, responding to emotions she usually kept carefully controlled. "What's happening to me?" she asked, though it wasn't fear that colored her voice. It was fascination. "Wonderland recognizes its own," the figure explained. Those who see through the lies of their world, who refuse to accept the madness others call sanity. Here, that clarity becomes power. Your will becomes reality. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the energy pulse through her. When she opened them again, the nearest flower had twisted itself into a spiral, responding to her unspoken desire. A smile curved her lips, not the demure expression she'd been forced to wear as Lady Ashworth, but something darker, truer. "And what am I expected to do with this power?" she asked, though she was already forming her own ideas. "That's entirely up to you, my dear," the figure said, beginning to fade like smoke on the wind. "Wonderland has been waiting for someone strong enough to reshape it. The question is, what kind of queen will you become?" As her mysterious guide disappeared, Eleanor stood alone in the impossible garden. She thought of the asylum cell that would have been her fate, of the years spent surviving Richard's attempts to break her spirit. Here, in this realm of madness, she felt more sane than she ever had in the real world. She reached out again with her newfound power, watching as the crystal trees bent and the flowers danced to her will. If this was madness, then perhaps she had been mad all along. And what a glorious thing that was. The energy continued to pulse through her, stronger with each heartbeat, and Eleanor Ashworth, no longer a prisoner, no longer a victim, took her first step down the shimmering path into Wonderland. The impossible garden stretched endlessly before Eleanor, each breath bringing new wonders and horrors. The roses that lined the twisting path wept actual blood, their crimson tears falling onto pearl-white petals. Above, the sky performed a dizzying dance, sunlight to starlight, dawn to dusk, each of Eleanor's exhales ushering in a new time of day. "Late, late, terribly late," a voice cut through her wonderment, high-pitched and frantic. A man burst through a hedge, sending bloody rose petals scattering. His once fine clothes hung in elegant tatters, and his entire body seemed to vibrate with nervous energy. Despite his disheveled appearance, he carried himself with the bearing of a gentleman, albeit one who couldn't stop wringing his hands. "You're finally here, but oh, the timing is all wrong." He circled Eleanor, checking a pocket watch that appeared to have 13 numbers and hands that moved backward. "I'm Warren Whitmore, though most call me the White Rabbit. And you're our newest Alice." "I told the other one, my name is Eleanor," she said firmly, watching as Warren's agitation seemed to increase with each passing second. "Names, titles, all shifting sand here," Warren's words tumbled out in a rush. "This is Wonderland, though that's a pretty name for an ugly truth. It's a prison, you see, but not of stone and iron. It's built of madness, shaped by the broken minds of Bedlam's inmates across centuries, their collective despair, their fractured realities, all merging into this." He gestured at the ever-changing landscape. Eleanor opened her mouth to question him further, but Warren's head suddenly snapped up like a startled animal's. "They're coming, both of them! Oh dear, this wasn't supposed to happen yet!" Before Eleanor could ask who was coming, Warren simply wasn't there anymore. One moment he stood before her, the next, empty air. The garden's atmosphere changed dramatically. On one side, the air crackled with manic energy. A procession emerged from between the bleeding roses, a court of the damned, led by a figure who commanded attention like a blade demands respect. "Welcome! Welcome!" The man's voice rang out with theatrical flair. He swept forward in an elaborate bow, his top hat defying gravity as he bent. Every color in his clothing clashed violently, yet somehow created a harmonious madness. "Terrence Highmore, at your service, though most know me as the Mad Hatter. We've been expecting you." His eyes, Eleanor noticed, changed color with each blink, green to gold to violet to black. His smile was razor-sharp and twice as dangerous. From the opposite direction, shadows began to pool and coalesce. They gathered into a human shape with fluid grace, eventually revealing a man who seemed to exist partially in this reality and partially elsewhere. His form wavered at the edges, like a reflection in disturbed water. Don't let him overwhelm you with his enthusiasm. This new voice was silk over steel, belonging to the shadow man who now lounged impossibly against thin air. His smile was predatory, yet held an allure that tugged at something deep in Eleanor's chest. Chester Vale. Some call me the Cheshire Cat, though names here are flexible. The tension between the two men was immediate and electric. Terence Court shifted restlessly, their own forms flickering between human and something else entirely. Chester's smile widened, showing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp to be natural. Eleanor stood between these opposing forces, acutely aware that she was the center of their attention. The energy she'd felt earlier hummed beneath her skin, responding to the power that radiated from both Tarrant and Chester. "Our newest arrival," Tarrant practically purred, spreading his arms wide. "Come, join us for tea. We have so much to discuss about your role here." "Tea?" Chester's laugh was a dark velvet sound. "Already trying to sink your claws in, Hatter? Perhaps she'd prefer to hear the truth about this place first, without your particular brand of sugar coating." Eleanor watched them both, her mind racing. In the real world, she'd learned to read men's intentions, to see the poison behind pleasant smiles. Here, in this realm of manifest madness, she sensed that both men were dangerous, but perhaps in ways that could prove useful. The garden seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. Blood dripped steadily from the roses, marking time like a macabre metronome. Above, the sky settled into an impossible twilight, as if even it couldn't choose between light and dark. Eleanor barely had time to consider her options before Tarrant swept forward, his coat swirling with impossible colors. "The choice, my dear Alice, has already been made." He grasped her hand, and the garden dissolved around them like watercolors in rain. When reality reassembled itself, they stood in what might have once been a grand estate's dining room. Now it was a nightmare's version of elegance. The endless table stretched into shadow, set with thousands of mismatched teacups. Some were filled with liquid that moved against gravity. Others contained things that writhed and whispered. Broken pocket watches decorated the walls like macabre trophies, their hands spinning wildly. Terrant's followers filled the chairs, men and women whose features seemed to shift between human and something else with each blink. They laughed and screamed in equal measure, pouring tea that steamed with unnatural colors. "Welcome to my humble home." Tarrant guided Eleanor to an ornate chair near the head of the table, "where we celebrate madness in all its splendid forms." His eyes swirled from emerald to violet as he spoke, his smile growing impossibly wider. "I prefer Eleanor," she said firmly, watching as he orchestrated the chaos around them with subtle gestures. "Names are such fluid things here, dear Alice." Tarrant perched on the table itself, scattering cups that somehow never spilled. "Like sanity, they're merely suggestions." He launched into a passionate discourse about the nature of reality and perception, his brilliant mind evident even through his fractured delivery. Eleanor found herself drawn into the discussion despite her wariness. Terrence's intelligence was razor-sharp, his observations about consciousness and magic surprisingly profound. He explained how Wonderland's rules bent to will and belief, how madness here was simply another form of power. The philosophical discussion shattered when a follower accidentally knocked over Terrence's personal teacup. The temperature in the room plummeted. Terrence's charm vanished like smoke, replaced by something ancient and cruel. "My dear March Hare," he said, his voice honey over broken glass, "have you forgotten the rules?" The unfortunate man began to shake, his features blurring between human and leporine. "Please, my lord, I didn't think." Tarrant was suddenly behind him, hands on the man's shoulders. "Then perhaps we should help you remember." He snapped his fingers, and the man's teacup began to fill with something that glowed in sickly green. "Drink it. All of it." Eleanor watched as the March Hare sobbed and obeyed, his form contorting as the liquid took effect. His screams turned to whimpers, then to mad giggling as he slumped in his chair, lost to whatever hallucination Tarrant had inflicted. "Now then!" Tarrant was instantly bright again, materializing back at Eleanor's side with a fresh teacup. The liquid inside shimmered like starlight. "Your first taste of Wonderland's finest brew, my dear Alice." Eleanor studied the cup, noting how the other guests watched with barely concealed anticipation. "I think not," she said calmly, meeting Terrence's swirling gaze. Instead of anger, pure delight bloomed across his face. He threw back his head and laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the vast room. "Oh, magnificent, absolutely magnificent. Such perfect madness, to come to Wonderland already wise to its ways." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of mercury and moonlight. "You're going to make this game so much more interesting." "She's not here to play your games, Hatter." The voice materialized before its owner, and Chester stepped out of a shadow that couldn't possibly have held him. He moved like oil on water, his form rippling at the edges as he approached the table. "Ah, the stray cat comes prowling." Terrence's tone remained playful, but danger crackled in the air between them. "Haven't you heard? Alice is my guest." "Eleanor," Chester corrected, earning a small smile from her, "is not yours to claim." He turned to her, his otherworldly eyes holding secrets like drowning depths. "You'll find his hospitality comes with strings, puppet strings to be precise." "While yours comes with what exactly?" Tarrant rose, his height suddenly seeming to increase. "Shadow-soaked promises? At least my intentions are clear as my tea." "Are they?" Chester's smile showed those two sharp teeth again. "Clear as mercury, perhaps." The air grew thick with tension as the two powerful beings faced each other, Eleanor seated between them like the prize in some twisted game. The other guests had gone completely still, as if afraid any movement might spark violence. The moon hung impossibly large outside Eleanor's window, casting silver light across a room that seemed to breathe with its own life. The wallpaper shifted patterns when she wasn't looking directly at it, and the furniture appeared to have been carved from living wood that still grew in subtle ways. She sat at the vanity, studying her reflection in a mirror that sometimes showed different versions of herself, some older, some younger, some with eyes that glowed like amber in darkness. The brush she'd found moved through her hair on its own, each stroke releasing the scent of roses and mint. "Enjoying Terrence's hospitality?" Eleanor didn't startle at Chester's voice materializing behind her. She'd half expected him to appear, watching in the mirror as his form coalesced from the shadows like ink dropping into water. His presence brought a chill to the air, along with something electric that made her skin prickle. "The accommodations are interesting," she replied, setting down the brush. "Though I suspect everything here comes with a price." Chester moved closer, his steps silent on the wooden floor. In the mirror, his reflection seemed to lag slightly behind his movements, creating an unsettling double image. "Clever girl. Terrence's gifts are beautiful poison. They bind you to him, thread by thread, until you're dancing to his whims without realizing the strings were ever attached." Eleanor turned to face him directly, noting how his edges seemed to blur into the darkness. "And what do your gifts bind one to, Chester?" His smile was dangerous and beautiful, like the edge of a perfectly honed blade. "Protection, freedom from his games, and manipulation." He gestured, and the shadows in the room deepened, creating a cocoon of privacy around them. "I can keep you safe from his madness." "In exchange for what?" Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Your allegiance. This is a war, Eleanor, has been for years. Tarrant and I each control our territories in Wonderland, but the balance is delicate." Chester's form shifted closer, and she caught the scent of midnight and wild things. With you in play, that balance could finally tip. Eleanor stood, refusing to let him loom over her. "And why am I so important in your game?" "Because you're different." Chester's voice dropped lower, intimate. "You arrived here already touched by darkness, already understanding the nature of power and control. You're not like the others who fall into Wonderland broken and lost. You came with your edges already sharpened." She thought of Richard, of the calculated way she'd ended his reign of terror over her life. "You're not wrong about that." "Then align yourself with me," Chester urged, reaching out to trace a finger along her jaw. His touch felt like cool silk and electric sparks. "Let me protect you from—" "No." Eleanor stepped back, her voice firm. Chester's eyes narrowed, glowing like distant stars. "No, I won't pledge myself to either of you," she declared, lifting her chin. "In fact, I have a counter-proposal." Interest flickered across Chester's ethereal features. "Do tell." "I'll remain neutral," Eleanor said, beginning to pace the room with measured steps. "Work with whichever of you proves most useful to my survival at any given moment. You both clearly want something from me, so earn it." A low chuckle rolled through the room like thunder. "You propose to play us against each other?" Chester's form rippled with something that might have been appreciation. "Dangerous game, little fox." "Life is dangerous," Eleanor countered. "I survived a monster who wore the mask of nobility. I killed him when he thought I was safely caged. I can handle your game." Chester moved like liquid shadow, suddenly right in front of her. "You're either brilliantly mad or magnificently cunning." His smile showed teeth that seemed sharper than before. "Perhaps both." "Does that frighten you?" Eleanor challenged. "On the contrary," Chester purred, "it makes you even more fascinating." He began to fade around the edges, his form dissolving into the darkness. "Very well, Eleanor, play your game. But remember, Wonderland has a way of changing the rules when you least expect it." "I'm counting on it," she replied to the empty air where he had been. The moon outside her window seemed to wink, and somewhere in the distance, she heard Terrence's laughter echo through the halls of his domain. Eleanor smiled to herself, knowing that both men would be intrigued rather than offended by her defiance. They recognized the darkness in her, the same calculating coldness that had allowed her to serve Richard poison in his favorite wine while smiling lovingly across the dinner table. Let them plot and scheme. She had survived one manipulative man's games. She could survive theirs. And perhaps, in playing them against each other, she might carve out a place for herself in this mad realm that bent to will and belief. The brush on her vanity resumed its movement, though no one held it, and Eleanor watched her reflection smile back at her with eyes that held secrets of their own. Eleanor woke to screaming. Not the usual screams that echoed through Wonderland's twisted corridors. She'd grown accustomed to those in her short time here. This was different, primal, wrong. The sound vibrated through her bones as she rushed to her window. In the courtyard below, beneath a sky that had turned an unnatural shade of crimson, a man thrashed on the ground. His body contorted at impossible angles, skin rippling like water disturbed by stones. "Don't watch," came Warren's voice, tight with anxiety. He appeared beside her, wringing his hands. "Please, you shouldn't see." But Eleanor couldn't look away. The man's screams turned to roars as his flesh split and reformed. Bones cracked and elongated, turning his human form into something monstrous. Wings erupted from his back, leathery and vast, his face elongated into a reptilian snout filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Jabberwock," Warren whispered, the word heavy with dread. The creature that had once been human let out a deafening shriek that shattered several windows. Its eyes blazed with mindless fury as it took flight, disappearing into the blood-red sky. What happened to him? Eleanor demanded, turning to Warren. Her hands shook, but her voice remained steady. Warren paced the room in quick, jerky movements. He lost himself completely. When the madness consumes everything that makes someone human, they transform, become part of Wonderland's defenses. Defenses against what? Warren's eyes darted to the corners of the room as if checking for listeners. Something worse, something that wants in. He grabbed Eleanor's arm, pulling her away from the window. But that's not what you need to worry about right now. The harvest is coming. The harvest? The word sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. The doctors, the real ones at Bedlam, they're not just keeping us locked away. They're using us. Warren's words tumbled out in a panicked rush. Every 3 months they perform rituals. Dark magic. They harvest the psychic energy from inmates to maintain Wonderland's barriers. The more unstable the mind, the more potent the energy. Eleanor thought of her trial, of the judge choosing Bedlam over the gallows. They sent me here on purpose. Warren nodded frantically. You're exactly what they want. Strong, violent. Your energy would be... He swallowed hard. The next harvest is in 10 weeks. Newcomers rarely survive their first one. Why hasn't anyone told me this? Eleanor's mind raced to her conversations with Chester and Tarrant. Their games and power plays seemed suddenly trivial in the face of this threat. They're both bound to Wonderland in their own ways. Tarrant through his madness, Chester through... Warren hesitated. Through other means. They can't leave, so they focus on their territorial war instead. But you're still new. You might have a chance to escape before the harvest. Eleanor moved to the window again, watching as servants below cleaned away the blood left behind by the transformed prisoner. How many survive the harvest? Maybe half. Those who do are never the same. Warren's voice cracked. The doctors, they wear these masks like plague doctors. They strap you down and... He shuddered, unable to continue. The sound of approaching footsteps made Warren jump. I've said too much. They'll know I told you. He backed toward the door. Be careful who you trust, Eleanor. Even the walls have ears here. He vanished just as Tarrant's distinctive humming echoed down the hallway. Eleanor's mind whirled with this new information, reassessing everything she thought she knew about her situation. The doctors were the true enemies, using Bedlam's inmates as fuel for their dark rituals. Tarrant and Chester, for all their dangerous games, had failed to warn her of this crucial threat. And somewhere beyond Wonderland's barriers lurked something so terrible that it required human sacrifice to keep it at bay. Eleanor clenched her fists, feeling the familiar cold clarity that had helped her survive Richard's abuse settle over her. She had 10 weeks to find a way out of this nightmare, or she'd become another sacrifice to Wonderland's twisted machinery. The humming grew closer, and Eleanor smoothed her expression. She couldn't let either of her would-be protectors know that she'd learned the truth. Not yet. Not until she understood why they'd kept this from her. Outside, the sky slowly faded from blood red back to its usual kaleidoscope of colors, as if trying to hide the horror she'd witnessed. In the distance, she heard the Jabberwocks cry, a sound of pure madness that promised more transformations to come. Eleanor made her way through Wonderland's ever-shifting landscape, following the trail of blood-red roses that marked the path to Regina Hartwell's domain. The Crimson Palace rose before her like a wound against the sky, its spires twisting into impossible shapes that hurt her eyes if she looked too long. 2 guards flanked the entrance, their faces painted white with hearts drawn in red around their eyes. They crossed their spears as Eleanor approached. "I seek an audience with the Red Queen," Eleanor announced, keeping her voice steady despite the way the guard's paint seemed to drip and move like real blood. "Her Majesty doesn't receive unexpected visitors," one guard sneered. "Tell her Eleanor Ashworth wishes to discuss the doctor's ritual." Eleanor watched satisfaction bloom across their faces as they recognized her name. The newest Alice, the one both Tarrant and Chester sought to claim. After a tense moment, they escorted her through corridors where everything was drenched in shades of red. The walls pulsed like living flesh, and the air smelled of copper and roses. Regina Hartwell sat upon a throne made of thorns and rubies, her crimson gown spreading around her like a pool of blood. Her pale face bore the aristocratic features of old nobility, but her eyes held the same madness Eleanor had seen in every powerful resident of Wonderland. "The new Alice," Regina purred, waving away her attendants. "Come to choose a side at last?" "I've come for information." Eleanor met the Queen's gaze without flinching. "About the ritual that created this place." Regina's perfectly painted lips curved into a cruel smile. "Ah, you've learned about the harvest then? Dear Warren does love to meddle. I know the doctors use us to maintain Wonderland's barriers. What I want to know is how to escape it." "Escape?" Regina laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Do you think you're the first to try? The doctors were brilliant in their cruelty. They built this prison using our own minds as the bars." Eleanor took a step closer to the throne. "But the ritual isn't perfect, is it?" Regina's amusement vanished. She leaned forward, suddenly intent. "What makes you say that?" "Because if it were, you wouldn't still be fighting for territory. You'd have accepted your imprisonment instead of trying to expand your power base." "Clever girl." Regina stood, descending the throne steps with predatory grace. "You're right. The ritual has gaps, flaws in its design. The doctors scattered the knowledge of these weaknesses among us, ensuring no single inmate could piece together the whole escape sequence. And you hold one of these pieces." "I do." Regina circled Eleanor slowly. "The question is, what would you give me for it?" Eleanor turned to track Regina's movement. "What do you want?" "Territory. Power." Regina stopped in front of Eleanor. "Either Tarrant or Chester dead. Your choice, which one? They've both rejected my previous offers of alliance. With one of them eliminated, I could expand my domain significantly." "You want me to assassinate one of them?" Eleanor kept her voice neutral, though her mind raced with possibilities. "They trust you," Regina said. "They're both so desperate for connection, so intrigued by your particular brand of madness. It would be easy for you to get close enough to strike." Eleanor pretended to consider the offer, though she had no intention of becoming Regina's assassin. The piece of the ritual sequence was valuable, yes, but killing either Tarrant or Chester would eliminate a potential ally she might need later. "I'll need time to think about it," Eleanor said carefully, "and proof that your information is genuine." Regina smiled again, reaching out to trace Eleanor's cheek with one blood-red nail. "Of course, but don't take too long to decide. The harvest approaches, and other pieces of the sequence are less accessible than mine." Eleanor forced herself not to flinch from the touch. "Where are the other pieces?" "Scattered through the minds of Wonderland's original inmates, those who survived the first ritual." Regina returned to her throne. "Tarrant holds one, naturally. Chester another. The rest?" She shrugged elegantly. "You'll have to discover that yourself." Eleanor recognized the dismissal in Regina's tone. She had what she came for: confirmation that escape was possible and the location of at least 3 pieces of the sequence. Now she just needed to find a way to steal Regina's piece without committing murder. "I'll return with my decision soon," Eleanor promised, already planning how she might infiltrate the Crimson Palace again. As guards appeared to escort her out, Regina called after her. "Choose quickly, little Alice. In Wonderland, time has a habit of running out just when you need it most." Terrance's workshop defied the laws of nature. Clocks covered every surface, their hands spinning wildly. Some clockwise, others counterclockwise, a few moving in impossible directions that made Eleanor's head ache if she watched too long. Mirrors lined the walls, but each showed a different reflection. One where she was still in her noble's dress from the trial, another where she appeared as a child, yet another where her face was streaked with blood. "How do you do it?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Bend reality to your will?" Terrence's hands stilled. He looked up at her with that mercurial smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Reality was always bendable, my dear Alice. Most people just lack the conviction to break it properly." "I'm not Alice," she reminded him, though she'd grown oddly fond of the way he insisted on using the name. "Names are just another reality we accept without question." He set down his tools and moved closer to her, his movements smooth and predatory, like the reality that says we're all mad here. Eleanor watched him approach, noting how the workshop seemed to pulse in time with his footsteps. "Aren't we?" "Madness is relative." He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell tea and mercury on his breath. "What's matter? Accepting abuse as natural order, or ending it with violence?" Her breath caught. He knew. Of course he knew. Everyone in Wonderland seemed to know her story. But there was something different in the way Terrence spoke of it, something that felt like understanding rather than judgment. "You were a doctor once," she said, watching his face carefully. "Before Wonderland." The change was instant. His eyes darkened to stormy gray, and the clocks around them began ticking louder, more erratically. "Dr. Tarrant Highmore," he spat the name like poison. "Scholar of the mind, seeker of truth, fool who thought he could save everyone." "What happened?" "I found their ritual." His voice dropped to a whisper, and the mirrors around them began showing the same scene. A younger Tarrant in physician's robes, discovering ancient texts in a hidden library. Saw what they planned to do with the patients, tried to stop them. He laughed bitterly. "They said my ravings about blood magic and psychic barriers proved I was unwell, needed treatment, needed to be contained." Eleanor reached out, touched his face. His skin was fever hot. "You tried to expose them, and became part of my own discovery instead." He leaned into her touch, his eyes clearing slightly. "They used me in the first ritual, made me watch as they harvested minds to build Wonderland's foundations. My brilliance, they said, would make an excellent cornerstone." "But you survived," Eleanor said softly. "You kept your mind." "Did I?" His smile turned razor sharp. "Or did I simply learn to wear my fractured pieces like a crown?" Eleanor understood then, truly understood, what she was seeing in his workshop. Every clock, every mirror, was a piece of his shattered psyche given form. He hadn't just learned to manipulate Wonderland's reality, he'd become one with it, his broken mind reshaping the space around him. "Why did you kill him?" Tarrant asked suddenly, his hands coming to rest on either side of her on the workbench. "Your lord husband?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. This close, she could see flecks of gold appearing in the gray of his eyes. "Because he deserved to die screaming." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The simple truth of it hung in the air between them, her complete lack of remorse, her absolute conviction in the righteousness of her violence. Terrence's smile transformed into something genuine and terrible and beautiful. "My perfectly sane Alice," he murmured, and then he was kissing her. He tasted of bergamot and madness, his lips surprisingly soft against hers. Eleanor didn't pull away. Instead, she wound her fingers into his wild hair and kissed him back, feeling the workshop's reality ripple around them in response. The clocks chimed in discordant harmony, and in every mirror their reflections melted together like watercolors. When he finally broke the kiss, his eyes had shifted to molten gold. "You see it now, don't you?" he breathed against her lips. "The beauty in breaking?" The shadows came alive that night, wrapping around Eleanor like silk as Chester materialized in her chambers. Without a word, he extended his hand, his usual predatory smile softened by something she couldn't quite name. "Come," he said simply. "There's something you need to see." Eleanor hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His touch was cool, almost ethereal, and the moment their fingers connected, reality shifted. The solid walls of her room became translucent, then transparent, dissolving into a space that wasn't quite anywhere at all. They stood in what seemed like the negative image of Wonderland, a realm of deeper shadows and muted echoes where everything familiar was slightly wrong. The garden she could see through the gossamer-thin reality was inverted, flowers growing downward from hanging roots, while the sky rippled like dark water. "What is this place?" Eleanor asked, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. "The spaces between thoughts," Chester replied, guiding her forward. His movements were more fluid here, as if this realm was his natural habitat. The thin places where Wonderland's reality wears through. Few can access these passages. Fewer still can survive them. Eleanor felt the truth of that in the way the shadows seemed to whisper, trying to pull her mind in 1,000 directions at once. But she held firm, anchored by Chester's grip and her own stubborn will. "You're doing remarkably well," he observed, watching her with those impossibly bright eyes. "Most go mad their first time here. The human mind isn't meant to comprehend the spaces between realities." "Bold of you to assume I'm entirely sane to begin with," Eleanor said dryly. Chester's laugh echoed strangely in the non-space. "Oh, I know exactly what you are, Eleanor Ashworth. That's why we're here." He led her through what seemed like tears in reality itself, showing her how to step through the fragments of Wonderland's broken landscape. With each passage, Eleanor felt herself growing more attuned to this strange dimension, learning to read the currents of unreality like a new language. Finally, they reached what appeared to be the edge of everything, a vast, swirling darkness that made Eleanor's skin crawl with ancient malevolence. "This," Chester said softly, "is what Wonderland was built to contain. The Bandersnatch." Eleanor could feel it, a presence so vast and hungry it made her breath catch. "What is it?" "An entity that feeds on suffering, on madness, on pain." Chester's face was more serious than she'd ever seen it. The doctors didn't build Wonderland as just a prison for the insane. They built it as a barrier against this. Understanding dawned cold and clear. "You're not an inmate at all, are you?" "No." Chester's form seemed to flicker, showing something older, something bound by chains of light and shadow. "I was part of the original ritual, a sacrifice, willingly given, to maintain the barrier." That's what the doctors didn't understand. It needed a guardian, someone to walk the spaces between and keep the walls strong. "And Tarrant?" Eleanor asked, thinking of the broken genius in his workshop of impossible clocks. "Wants to tear it all down." Chester's expression darkened. "He believes destroying Wonderland will free everyone trapped here. He's not wrong, but he doesn't understand what else it would unleash." Eleanor studied Chester's face, seeing past his usual mask of seductive danger to something far more complex. "So your little war isn't about territory at all." "Territory?" He laughed bitterly. "I've spent centuries alone in these shadows, watching generation after generation of inmates live and die and transform, fighting Terrance's attempts to break the barrier, trying to maintain some kind of balance in this beautiful, terrible prison." "Then why involve me at all?" Eleanor challenged. "Why show me these passages, teach me these secrets?" Chester turned to her then, and for the first time, she saw his carefully constructed facade crack completely. Vulnerability showed through, raw and startling as a fresh wound. "Because you're the first person in a century who might be strong enough to fix what's broken without destroying everything," he whispered. The honest need in his voice caught Eleanor off guard. She'd grown used to his games, his seductive manipulation, his careful distance. This was different. This was real. Looking at him now, Eleanor saw past the predatory grace to the loneliness of his eternal vigil. Despite every instinct warning her against trust, she found herself believing him. Perhaps it was the way the shadows themselves seemed to confirm his story, or perhaps it was simply that she recognized the weight of necessary violence in his eyes, the same weight she'd carried since driving that knife into her husband's heart. "Show me," she said softly. "Show me everything." The garden of memories stretched before Eleanor like a fever dream made real. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, their petals weeping actual tears, while others sang lullabies in voices that broke her heart. At its center stood Cordelia Ashford, the Duchess, tending to her bizarre flora with the delicate care of a mother. Eleanor approached carefully, noting how the flowers seemed to lean toward Cordelia like children seeking comfort. The former midwife's dark hair was streaked with silver, her once fine dress now soil-stained and torn. But there was power in her movements, in the way the garden responded to her touch. "I'm told you hold a piece of the ritual," Eleanor said directly. Cordelia finally turned, revealing eyes that held both madness and terrible clarity. "And what would you trade for such knowledge? Gold? Secrets? Power?" She laughed softly. "I have grown gardens from all three, and still my daughter's face fades like morning dew." "Name your price," Eleanor replied, watching as a nearby flower transformed into spun glass, then shattered, only to reform again. "Her name was Mary," Cordelia whispered, and the entire garden trembled. "Mary Elizabeth Ashford. She lived 3 days, long enough to smile once, just once." She touched a flower that looked like it was made of moonlight. "When they took me away, they erased her from all records, as if she never existed, as if a mother's love could be stripped away like ink from paper." Understanding dawned. "You want me to remember her name? When you escape, and you will escape, I see it growing in you like one of my deadly blooms. I want you to speak her name in the real world, make her real again." Cordelia's eyes filled with tears that fell as pearls. "That is my price, her memory for the ritual fragment." "I swear it," Eleanor said firmly. "Mary Elizabeth Ashford will be remembered." Cordelia nodded and pressed the moonlight flower into Eleanor's hand. As it dissolved, knowledge flooded her mind, symbols and words in a language that tasted like starlight and ash. But there was no time to process this new information. Eleanor needed to find the twins next, and they were notoriously difficult to pin down. She found Twyla and Tobias Brennan in what appeared to be a massive chessboard that stretched to the horizon, each square large enough to build a house upon. The children, who looked no more than 12, sat cross-legged on adjacent squares, one black, one white, moving chess pieces that walked on their own. "The queen moves 3 spaces left," Twyla said. "But the knight was never there," Tobias countered. "Because tomorrow happened yesterday." They finished in unison, turning identical blue eyes to Eleanor. Looking at them made her head hurt. They were mirror images of each other, down to the way they tilted their heads in opposite directions. These children should never have been in Bedlam, but their synchronized madness had made them powerful here. "The piece is the whole," Twyla began. "But the whole is broken," Tobias continued. "Like mirrors," they said together. Eleanor felt Wonderland's magic pressing against her mind, making their riddles almost seem logical. She had to focus to keep her thoughts clear. "I'm collecting the fragments to understand the whole." The twins smiled identical smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "The looking glass always breaks from the inside," Twyla said softly. "But sometimes breaking is making," Tobias added. "And making is taking," they chorused. They each held out a hand, holding what appeared to be broken mirror shards. When Eleanor took them, they melted into her skin like ice, carrying another fragment of knowledge directly into her consciousness. The magic of Wonderland surged stronger with each piece she collected. Reality seemed to ripple around her now, responding to her thoughts. The line between what was real and what was manifested by the collective madness of this place grew increasingly blurred. Eleanor pressed her hands to her temples, trying to sort through the fragments she'd gathered. Cordelia's piece tasted like tears and earth, while the twins' knowledge felt like shattered glass being reassembled in her mind. Each new piece made her both stronger and more uncertain of her own solidity in this realm. She looked down at her hands, watching as they seemed to flicker between flesh and shadow, real and unreal. The magic was changing her, just as it had changed everyone else trapped here. But she couldn't stop now. There were more fragments to collect, and time was running out before the next harvest. Eleanor stood in the midnight garden, a peculiar space that existed in the thin veil between Terence and Chester's territories. Here, reality seemed to hold its breath. Flowers bloomed in shades of starlight, and the grass whispered secrets in languages long forgotten. The ritual fragments she'd collected burned in her mind like embers, forming a map that was both solution and sacrifice. She'd called them both here, knowing this moment would either save them or destroy everything. Chester materialized first, stepping through the shadows as if they were doorways, his presence bringing a predatory grace to the ethereal garden. Moments later, Tarrant arrived in a whirlwind of controlled chaos, his mercurial energy making the flowers dance and change colors. They kept their distance from each other, centuries of rivalry creating an almost visible tension in the air. But their eyes were fixed on Eleanor, waiting. "I've been playing you both," she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Using you to gather the ritual fragments, to learn the secrets of Wonderland." She watched their expressions carefully, but neither showed surprise. "Of course you have, darling," Terrence said, a dangerous smile playing at his lips. "It's one of the things we admire about you." Chester's low chuckle seemed to ripple through the shadows. "Did you think we didn't know? Your cunning is as beautiful as your brutality." Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling Wonderland's magic pulse around them. "I have the map now, the way to break the ritual, but I can't do it alone." She turned to Tarrant. "I need your knowledge of how to bend reality, your genius for turning madness into power." Then to Chester, "And I need your understanding of the barriers, your ability to move through the spaces between." "And why should we help you escape?" Chester asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Because I'm not just asking for help to escape," Eleanor said, taking a step toward them both. "I'm asking you to come with me." The garden seemed to hold its breath, waiting. "I'm falling for you both," she continued, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Not despite what you are, but because of it. Because when I told you how I killed Richard, how I made him suffer as he made me suffer, you didn't see madness. You saw justice." Tarrant moved closer, his eyes flickering between their natural green and the gold of Wonderland's magic. "You are magnificently mad, my Alice. Your rage is not sickness, it's strength. Your darkness is not something to be cured," Chester added, closing the distance from the other side. "It's something to be wielded." They stood now in a perfect triangle, power crackling between them like lightning waiting to strike. Eleanor could feel the weight of their gazes, the pull of their different but equally magnetic energies. "Help me break us out of here," she said. "The three of us together. Let me show you what real freedom tastes like." Tarrant moved first, catching her face between his hands and kissing her with all the wild passion of his fractured brilliance. His lips tasted like lightning and tea leaves, like the perfect edge between genius and madness. When he pulled back, his smile was razor-sharp and beautiful. Before she could catch her breath, Chester was there, his kiss as deep as shadow and just as mysterious. He tasted like midnight and secrets, like the spaces between heartbeats where reality bent and broke. His hands on her waist were solid despite his ethereal nature, grounding her even as her head spun. When they finally separated, the three of them remained close, connected by touch and intention and possibility. The midnight garden bloomed impossibly brighter around them, responding to their combined power. "Consequences be damned," Tarrant declared, his grin manic and delighted. Chester's purr of agreement seemed to vibrate through all of them. "Let's tear down these walls and see what burns." For the first time since arriving in Wonderland, Eleanor felt more than just safe. She felt chosen, understood, powerful. The ritual fragments sang in her mind, no longer a burden, but a promise. Her darkness had found its match in these two men who saw her truth and celebrated it. They stood together in their midnight garden, three broken pieces forming something dangerously beautiful, and Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that they would either escape together or burn Wonderland to ashes trying. In Tarrant's workshop, time moved strangely. Clocks ticked backward and sideways, their hands spinning in impossible patterns, while Eleanor studied the ritual diagrams spread across a massive table. Pieces of mirror hung from the ceiling, catching and reflecting different versions of reality, while Chester's shadows danced between them. "The synchronization must be perfect," Tarrant explained, his fingers tracing patterns in the air that left golden trails of magic. That moment between sleep and waking, when the mind exists in both worlds at once, that's our window. Chester materialized fully beside Eleanor, his presence cool and steady against her shoulder. It's the thinnest point in the barrier. When consciousness wavers, reality becomes flexible. Eleanor touched one of the diagrams, feeling the psychic energy pulse beneath her fingertips. "And we'll have to channel our powers together? All three of us?" "Yes," Terrence said, his eyes shifting from green to gold as he worked. "My ability to bend reality, Chester's knowledge of the void, and your—" He paused, smiling that dangerous smile she'd grown to love. "Your perfect, beautiful clarity." They worked through the night, their energies mingling as they practiced synchronizing their powers. Tarrant would create a pocket of altered reality. Chester would find its weakest point, and Eleanor would drive her will through that point like a blade. Each attempt brought them closer, both to success and to each other. During a break, as moonlight filtered through the twisted windows, Tarrant's usual manic energy faltered. "I tried before, you know," he said quietly, his hands shaking as he poured tea that changed color with each drop. "When I first discovered what the doctors were doing, I tried to save them, the other inmates, but I failed. They harvested 17 souls that day while I watched, helpless, from my cell." Eleanor took his trembling hands in hers, steadying them. "You were alone then. You're not alone now." Chester emerged from the shadows, his usual predatory grace softened by understanding. "We all carry our chains," he said, moving to stand behind Tarrant, one hand on his shoulder. "Mine have been literal for centuries. This prison was meant to be my eternal duty, protecting the world from the Bandersnatch by staying bound here forever." "How have you endured it?" Eleanor asked softly. Chester's smile held more sorrow than satisfaction, mostly by forgetting what human connection felt like. Until now. Eleanor felt the weight of their confessions, the trust they placed in her. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I think about staying. Here, I'm not just the mad woman who killed her husband. Here, I have power. I can reshape reality, bend it to my will. Out there," she trailed off. "Out there, you'll still be powerful," Tarrant assured her, his lucidity sharp and clear in this moment. "We've seen your true nature. It wasn't Wonderland that made you strong. It just gave you space to recognize your strength. They spent the next several days perfecting their coordination. In the gardens between territories, they practiced moving as one, Chester guiding them through the void, while Tarrant manipulated the fabric of reality around them. Eleanor learned to extend her will through their combined power, her clarity cutting through Wonderland's chaos like a lighthouse beam through fog. The new moon approached quickly. 3 days before the scheduled harvest, they made their final preparations in Tarrant's workshop. The ritual circle was drawn in ink that shifted colors, mirrors positioned to catch and amplify their combined energy. They had one chance to get it right. The timing must be precise, Chester reminded them, his form flickering between solid and shadow as he checked the barriers. Too early, and we'll be trapped between worlds. Too late, and we'll be caught in the harvest, Eleanor finished. She understood the stakes perfectly. Tarrant looked up from his calculations, his expression unusually focused. We'll need to fall asleep at exactly midnight in the real world. That's when the barrier is naturally thinnest. They spent their last hours before the attempt in quiet preparation, drawing strength from each other's presence. Eleanor sat between them as they made final adjustments to the ritual circle, feeling the steady pulse of Chester's otherworldly power on one side and the electric current of Tarrant's chaos on the other. Together, they were a perfect circuit of complementary energies. The moon vanished from Wonderland's sky, leaving them in a darkness broken only by the ghostly glow of Tarrant's enchanted candles. Everything was ready. In 3 days, they would either be free or lost forever to the harvest's hunger. Eleanor looked at her lovers, the mad genius and the shadow guardian, and felt no fear. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They had something the doctors and their ritual had never counted on, a bond forged in darkness but aimed toward light, 3 broken pieces that made each other whole. Eleanor stood in Tarrant's court, the endless tea party frozen in shocked silence as Regina's high-pitched voice cut through the usual chaos. The Red Queen had burst in during the afternoon gathering, her crimson gown billowing like spilled blood around her, face twisted in fury. "You dare?" Regina snarled, stalking toward Eleanor. "You dare plot behind my back after I shared my knowledge with you?" Her fingers curled into claws, red sparks of magic crackling between them. Eleanor remained seated, taking a deliberate sip of tea. The court watched, breathless, as tension crackled between the two women. Tarrant lounged in his chair at the head of the table, his eyes glittering with dangerous amusement, while Chester's presence rippled through the shadows around them. "I dare many things," Eleanor replied coolly, "though I don't recall pledging you any loyalty." Regina slammed her hands on the table, sending teacups flying. "You think you belong here, with them?" She gestured dismissively at Tarrant and the shadowy corners where Chester lurked. "You're nothing but a frightened little girl playing at madness. I've watched you, still clinging to your human notions of right and wrong, still trying to justify your violence." Eleanor set down her teacup with precise control. "Careful, Your Majesty." "Or what?" Regina leaned closer, her smile cruel. "You'll kill me like you killed your husband? That's not madness, dear. That's just survival. Common, boring survival. You're too weak for Wonderland, too sane to truly—" Eleanor moved faster than thought. One moment she was seated, the next she had Regina pinned against the table, one hand locked around the queen's throat. Tea and cakes scattered across the floor as Regina thrashed, her face turning as red as her dress. "You want to see madness?" Eleanor's voice was terrifyingly calm as her fingers tightened. "Let me show you what happens when I stop justifying my violence." Regina's eyes bulged, her perfectly manicured nails clawing at Eleanor's grip. The court watched in horrified fascination as their queen's struggles grew weaker, her lips turning blue. "Eleanor," Chester's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Not like this." Tarrant appeared beside them, his hand gentle but firm on Eleanor's shoulder. "She's not worth derailing our plans, love. Let her keep her petty throne." For a long moment, Eleanor didn't move. She stared into Regina's fading eyes, seeing the fear replace the mockery. It would be so easy to finish it, to feel that last flutter of life slip away under her hands. Finally, she released her grip. Regina collapsed, gasping and coughing, her carefully crafted dignity shattered as she slid to the floor. "I don't justify my violence," Eleanor said softly, straightening her dress. "I simply choose when to unleash it. Remember that, Your Majesty, the next time you mistake kindness for weakness." Regina scrambled to her feet, her hair in disarray and her throat already bruising. She backed away, her eyes wild with humiliation and rage. Without another word, she fled the court, her followers scattering in her wake. The tea party resumed its usual chaotic revelry, but tension lingered in the air like lightning before a storm. Chester materialized fully beside Eleanor, while Tarrant draped himself across his chair, watching her with dark appreciation. "That," Tarrant said, "was exquisite, though perhaps not terribly strategic." Before Eleanor could respond, Warren burst into the court, his perpetual anxiety ratcheted up to pure panic. He skidded to a stop before them, wringing his hands. "My lords, my lady, she's gone to them. Regina, she's found a way to contact the doctors in the real world." Warren's words tumbled out in a frenzied rush. "She's told them everything. About you, about your power. She's trading your location for her freedom. They're coming. They're coming for the harvest early." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face as Chester and Tarrant went perfectly still beside her. Their carefully laid plans, their precise timing, all of it threatened by Regina's spite. "How long?" Chester demanded, his form flickering with barely contained fury. Warren twisted his pocket watch chain until his fingers turned white. "Hours, maybe less. She's been planning this, waiting for the right moment. The doctors are already preparing the ritual chamber in the real world." The court erupted in chaos around them, but Eleanor barely heard it. She looked at her lovers, seeing her own determination reflected in their eyes. Their window of opportunity was closing fast, and Regina had just forced their hand. Reality shattered like glass around Eleanor. One moment she stood in Terrance's court, the next she felt herself being torn between two worlds: the impossible landscape of Wonderland and the cold, stark reality of Bedlam Asylum. "Hold her down!" a muffled voice commanded through a leather mask. Eleanor's physical body convulsed against metal restraints, her skin burning where they'd painted ritual symbols in her own blood. In Wonderland, the sky cracked open, raining shards of possibility. The endless tea party dissolved into chaos as the doctor's harvest ritual pulled at the very fabric of Eleanor's consciousness. She stumbled, caught between worlds, feeling Chester's desperate grab for her arm pass through her like smoke. "Eleanor!" Terrance's voice echoed strangely, distorted by the fracturing reality. He reached for her with magic that glowed like mercury, trying to anchor her to Wonderland. "Focus on my voice. Stay with us." But the doctor's ritual was stronger, designed specifically for minds like hers, violent, potent, crackling with dangerous energy. Eleanor felt herself being pulled apart, stretched between realities. In the asylum, cold metal pierced her flesh as the doctors worked with mechanical precision, placing needles at specific points to channel her essence. "The subject shows exceptional potential," one doctor noted clinically. "Such darkness, such perfect violence. She'll make a magnificent Jabberwock." Chester materialized beside her, his form flickering violently as he fought against the ritual's pull. "Eleanor, listen to me. You have to fight. If they complete the transformation—" Pain exploded through Eleanor's consciousness as another needle found its mark. The doctor's chanting grew louder, ancient words that scraped against her mind like rusted nails. She saw them clearly now through the haze of agony. 3 men in black robes and beaked masks, moving around her body with practiced efficiency. Blood dripped from their instruments, feeding the symbols they'd painted on her skin. "Your mind will be gone," Chester continued desperately, his voice fading in and out like a bad dream. "You'll become nothing but a weapon for them to control." Tarrant appeared on her other side, his usual mania replaced by focused intensity. "We can't break their ritual. It's too strong, too specific." His hands moved through complex patterns, trying to weave reality back together around her. "They've been planning this since you arrived. Regina just gave them the excuse they needed." Eleanor screamed as the doctors began the final phase. In the asylum, they pressed a cruel device against her temples, designed to shred consciousness and remake it into mindless rage. In Wonderland, her form began to twist, darkness seeping from her skin like ink in water. "The transformation begins," one doctor announced with clinical satisfaction. "Observe how the subject's inherent violence accelerates the process." Chester and Tarrant fought against the ritual's power, but they couldn't reach her. Their magic slid off the doctor's protection like water off glass. Eleanor felt her thoughts starting to fragment, memories scattering like leaves in a storm. The darkness spread further, threatening to consume everything she was. "Eleanor!" Chester's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Stay with us. Remember who you are." But who was she? The doctor's chanting filled her mind, drowning out everything else. She saw glimpses of her past, killing Richard, being condemned, arriving in Wonderland, but they felt distant, belonging to someone else. The darkness pulled at her, promising power without conscience, violence without reason. Through the haze of transformation, Eleanor caught one final glimpse of reality. The doctors stood over her body, their masks gleaming in the candlelight, satisfaction radiating from their postures as they watched her humanity slip away. Their ritual was almost complete. Soon, she would become their perfect weapon, a Jabberwock born of calculated cruelty rather than natural madness, bound to their will for eternity. "The subject's consciousness is dissolving perfectly," one doctor observed. "Soon, nothing will remain but pure, weaponized insanity." Eleanor tried to hold on to herself, onto the love she'd found with Tarrant and Chester, but everything was slipping away. The darkness pulled harder, reshaping her into something monstrous. In Wonderland, her form continued to twist and change as the doctor's magic tore away everything that made her human. The last thing Eleanor heard clearly was Tarrant's anguished whisper, "Stay with us, love. Please stay with us." Then the darkness took her, and Eleanor Ashworth began to disappear. Eleanor floated in a space between spaces, neither fully in Wonderland nor completely in Bedlam. Here, in this liminal void, time stretched like taffy, giving her one last moment of perfect clarity before the doctor's ritual consumed her entirely. Images from the night she killed Richard Ashworth flickered through her consciousness. But they weren't the frenzied flashes of a madwoman's memories. No, each moment played out with crystalline precision, as meticulously orchestrated as a conductor's symphony. She remembered choosing the knife carefully from the kitchen, testing its edge with her thumb. Remembered waiting until Richard was deep in his cups, vulnerable but not so drunk he couldn't feel everything she planned to do. She had prepared for weeks, studying anatomy from his medical texts, learning exactly where to cut to cause maximum pain with minimal risk of immediate death. The first slice across his chest had been shallow, deliberate. "This is for Sarah," she had whispered, naming the scullery maid he'd beaten to death. Each cut after that had its own dedication, for the servants he'd tormented, for the women he'd assaulted, for every bruise and broken bone he'd given Eleanor herself. There in the void, Eleanor faced these memories not with horror or shame, but with the same cold satisfaction she'd felt while performing the act itself. She had planned every scream, savored every plea for mercy, and when he finally died, she had watched the light leave his eyes with perfect, unflinching clarity. "I'm not mad," Eleanor whispered into the void. understanding blooming like frost across glass. I never was. The world had called her insane because they couldn't accept the truth that a woman could choose violence with such precision, could deal death with such purpose, could feel absolutely no remorse for an act of calculated brutality. They named her mad because her sanity terrified them more than any fever of the mind ever could. Fragments of the doctor's ritual pulled at her consciousness, trying to twist her into a mindless beast. But in this moment of brutal self-recognition, Eleanor saw through their fundamental misunderstanding. They thought they were harvesting her madness, her rage, her trauma, but those weren't the source of her power at all. Her strength came from acceptance, perfect, crystalline acceptance of exactly who and what she was. A woman who had chosen violence with clear eyes and steady hands. A woman who would choose it again, who would kill 1,000 Richards if necessary, each death as carefully choreographed as a dance. "You're trying to break my mind," Eleanor addressed the doctor's magic as it tore at her essence. "But my mind was never broken. Every choice I made was deliberate. Every act of violence was chosen. My clarity is what makes me dangerous, not my madness." The revelation should have saved her. This understanding of her true nature should have given her the strength to resist the transformation. But the ritual had progressed too far, had sunk too deeply into her flesh and spirit. Even as Eleanor finally embraced the perfect, terrifying sanity at her core, she felt herself dissolving. Darkness crept through her consciousness like ink through water, not clouding her thoughts, but crystallizing them into something monstrous. She could feel her humanity slipping away, not into chaos, but into a new kind of order. Something ancient and predatory and perfectly, horribly sane. The doctor's chanting reached a fever pitch in both realities. Eleanor hung suspended between worlds, clinging to this last moment of self-awareness. She wasn't being driven mad. She was being transformed into something else entirely, something that would retain all her calculating precision, but lose the last shreds of her humanity. "I chose violence," she whispered into the void as the darkness claimed her. "I chose it with my eyes wide open. I am not mad. I am not mad. I am not—" The transformation took her then, and Eleanor felt herself becoming something else, something that would remember how to plan every cut, but forget why the cutting had once meant something more than simple destruction. In Wonderland's fractured landscape, reality rippled and cracked like breaking ice as Eleanor's transformation began. Tarrant and Chester stood at the edge of their respective territories, watching in horror as the space where Eleanor had been became a vortex of writhing shadows and burning light. Her first scream shattered every mirror in Wonderland simultaneously, raining glass across tea parties and rose gardens, through palace halls and hidden passages. It wasn't a sound of madness. It held too much precision, too much awareness. This was the cry of someone who knew exactly what they were losing. "No, no, no," Tarrant muttered, his hands pulling at his wild hair. "Not again, not her, I won't fail again." His voice shifted between accents, between personalities, fracturing further under the weight of his guilt. Images of all those he'd failed to save before Eleanor flashed through his splintered mind. Scholars who'd discovered too much, inmates who'd trusted him to protect them, faces and names that haunted his endless tea parties. He hurled himself at the barrier the doctor's ritual had erected, throwing every trick of reality bending he knew against its surface. The magic sizzled against his skin, burning away layers of sanity he couldn't afford to lose. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Even as blood began to trickle from his eyes and ears, even as his own grip on reality started to dissolve, he kept attacking the barrier. "Tarrant, stop!" Chester materialized beside him, trying to pull him back. "You'll destroy yourself." "Better destroyed than watching another Alice fall," Tarrant snarled, his eyes cycling through colors like a kaleidoscope gone mad. He summoned more power, drawing from the deepest wells of his fractured psyche, not caring that each pull threatened to shatter his mind completely. Chester felt the barrier between worlds growing dangerously thin where Tarrant attacked it. His guardian instincts screamed at him to stop this assault, to protect the boundary that kept the Bandersnatch contained. For centuries, that had been his purpose, his prison, his sacred duty, maintaining the barrier at all costs. But Eleanor's next scream tore through him like a physical blade, and Chester found himself caught between duty and desperate love. He could feel her consciousness being twisted, reshaped into something monstrous. The woman who had seen through his facades, who had matched his predatory nature with her own perfect clarity, was being erased one memory at a time. In the real world, Eleanor's physical body thrashed against its restraints. The doctors worked with mechanical precision, their plague masks reflecting the candlelight as they carved eldritch symbols into her flesh. Blood ran in carefully directed patterns, feeding the ritual that would transform her into their weapon. "The vessel is ready," one doctor intoned, his voice muffled behind his mask. "Proceed with the final binding." Through the thinning barrier, Chester and Tarrant could see these moments overlapping with Wonderland's reality. They watched helplessly as Eleanor's form began to elongate, her elegant fingers extending into claws, her pale skin darkening to scales. "Eleanor!" Terrence's voice cracked as he threw himself against the barrier one final time. The impact sent fractures through his psyche, and he collapsed to his knees, blood streaming from his nose. "Please, remember who you are." Chester phased through the spaces between thoughts, trying to reach her through the ritual's magic. He got close enough to see her eyes, still human, still holding that terrifying clarity, before the doctor's chanting reached its crescendo. "Fight," he whispered, his form flickering between solid and shadow. "You're stronger than their chains. Remember who you are." But even as the words left his lips, Chester knew they had come too late. The transformation swept through Eleanor like a tide of darkness, erasing the last traces of human consciousness from her gaze. Her body contorted, growing larger, more monstrous, until she filled the ritual chamber with coils of scaled flesh and razor-sharp edges. When her eyes opened again, they were bottomless pools of black, empty of any recognition. No trace remained of the woman who had killed her husband with such precise cruelty, who had navigated Wonderland's politics with calculating grace, who had made two broken men fall in love with her perfect, terrifying sanity. The roar that tore from her throat shook the foundations of both realities. The first cry of a Jabberwock, a sound of mindless destruction that held none of Eleanor's calculated violence. It echoed through Wonderland's twisted landscapes, through Bedlam's blood-soaked halls, heralding the birth of something that was no longer Eleanor at all. But in that crystalline moment between human and monster, as Eleanor felt her consciousness beginning to slip away, something unexpected happened. A thought, sharp as a surgeon's blade, cut through the chaos of the transformation. The doctors had fundamentally misunderstood her madness. They saw her as wild, unstable, a force of chaos they could harness and direct. But Eleanor's true nature had always been something far more dangerous, a perfect, terrifying clarity. The same methodical precision that had guided her hand as she carved her husband's flesh, the cold calculation that had let her play Tarrant and Chester against each other, the absolute certainty that her violence was justice, not madness. This wasn't chaos. This was control. Eleanor seized that realization like a weapon, turning it inward against the ritual trying to consume her mind. Where the doctors expected resistance, thrashing, the desperate fight of a wild animal being caged, they found instead the surgical precision of a woman who had orchestrated her husband's death down to the last scream. The transformation continued, but now Eleanor directed it with the same meticulous attention she'd once used to plan her revenge. She felt her body expanding, muscles rippling into inhuman strength, skin hardening to scales sharp as armor. But unlike the mindless jabberwocks that prowled Wonderland's borders, Eleanor maintained her consciousness. She wore the monster like a carefully chosen gown, accepting its power while refusing to surrender her mind to its rage. In the ritual chamber, the doctor's chanting faltered as they sensed something going wrong. The symbols carved into Eleanor's flesh began to glow with an unnatural light. But instead of the sickly green they expected, the marks burned with a cold, white clarity that matched the look in her eyes. "Something's wrong," one doctor muttered behind his plague mask. "The consciousness isn't fragmenting as it should." Eleanor felt their growing uncertainty like blood in the water. Her new form continued to take shape, but each change came under her control, guided by that same precision she'd used to plan every cut, every bruise, every moment of her husband's suffering. The Jabberwock's legendary strength flowed through her veins. Its natural weapons became extensions of her will, but her mind remained razor-sharp and utterly, terrifyingly sane. The lead doctor stepped forward, raising his ritual blade to attempt a correction to the spell. But he froze when Eleanor's eyes met his through the eye holes of his mask. They weren't the mindless black pools of a beast, nor were they clouded with madness. Instead, they held the same cold intelligence that had watched her husband bleed out, the same calculating awareness that had navigated Wonderland's political landscape. "Impossible," he whispered, taking an involuntary step back. "The consciousness should be gone." But Eleanor was more present than ever, her mind expanding to fill her new form rather than being consumed by it. She felt the power of the Jabberwock singing through her transformed body, but it was a song she conducted rather than one that controlled her. Every scale, every claw, every enhanced sense became another tool in her arsenal, wielded with the same deliberate purpose as the knife she'd used on her husband. The doctor's ritual continued to unravel as their fundamental assumption proved fatally flawed. They had tried to harness chaos, to transform madness into a weapon they could control. Instead, they had given tremendous power to a woman whose greatest strength was her absolute clarity of purpose, her unshakable certainty in her own actions. Eleanor felt the last pieces of the transformation lock into place. Her new form was massive, powerful, everything a Jabberwock should be, but her mind remained entirely her own. She looked down at the doctors through eyes that held not bestial rage but human intelligence, watching their dawning horror as they realized what they had actually created. They had tried to make her into a monster they could control. Instead, they had given form to something far more dangerous, a woman who had always known exactly what she was, who embraced her darkness with perfect clarity, and who now had the power to match her purpose. The doctors saw their mistake reflected in Eleanor's gaze, still human, still aware, still filled with that same calculating precision that had guided her revenge. In that moment, they understood their fatal error. They hadn't turned her mad. They had given her the means to express her terrifying sanity on a scale they never imagined possible. Eleanor felt the doctor's magic flowing through her, their ritual creating a bridge between worlds. But where they meant to drain her essence into their spells, she seized control of that connection with surgical precision. Like redirecting the flow of a river, she turned their own power back on them. The lead doctor stumbled, his plague mask tilting askew, as he felt the first pull of Eleanor's counterattack. "What? What are you doing?" His voice trembled with the first notes of real fear. Eleanor's new form towered over them, each scale gleaming with reflected candlelight. When she spoke, her voice carried both human intelligence and bestial power. "Giving you exactly what you deserve." She reached into their minds through the ritual's channels, not with chaos or rage, but with the same methodical care she'd once used to plan her husband's death. One by one, she found the darker corners of their souls, the guilt they buried beneath self-righteousness, the fear they masked with cruelty, the darkness they projected onto their victims. The doctors began to scream as Eleanor pulled these shadows to the surface. Their own ritual, designed to harvest the minds of others, became the tool of their undoing. She felt their desperate attempts to break the connection, but they had built their spell too well. The same bonds that should have trapped her consciousness now held them fast. "Please," one doctor begged, falling to his knees. "We were only trying to protect—" "To protect what?" Eleanor's claws clicked against the stone floor as she moved closer. "Your power, your control. Don't insult me with lies. I know exactly what protection looks like." The memory of her husband's abuse flickered through her mind. This isn't it. She poured their essence into Wonderland, feeding their twisted energies into the realm they had created through others' suffering. The doctors' bodies began to sway, their chanting turned to whimpers as their consciousness was slowly dragged across the barrier between worlds. The ritual chamber's air grew thick with power. Candles flickered blue, then green, then a pure, cold white that matched the glow in Eleanor's transformed eyes. She could feel Wonderland reshaping itself, absorbing the doctor's energy and turning it into something new. The chamber door burst open. Tarrant and Chester rushed in, ready for battle, only to freeze at the sight before them. Eleanor's Jabberwock form dominated the space, but it was the doctors that drew their attention. 5 bodies slumping to the floor one by one, their minds already gone. "Eleanor?" Chester's voice carried equal parts awe and concern as he moved through the shadows toward her. "My dear, magnificent Alice," Tarrant breathed, his fractured mind for once completely focused on the scene before him. Eleanor turned to face them, her massive form moving with unexpected grace. Even in this monstrous shape, they could see her essence shining through, that perfect clarity that had drawn them both to her from the beginning. The last doctor fell, his mask clattering against the stone. Their bodies still breathed, but their minds were now trapped in Wonderland, prisoners in the very realm they had used to imprison others. Eleanor felt the ritual's power fading, its purpose served. With careful concentration, she let her borrowed form fade away. The transformation reversed smoothly, scales melting back into skin, massive limbs shrinking to human proportion. When it finished, Eleanor stood before them in her own shape, swaying slightly but upright. Fresh scars from the doctor's ritual covered her arms and throat, glowing faintly with residual power. Blood, both hers and the doctor's, stained her asylum dress, but she had never looked less like a victim. Her eyes held the same cold fire that had guided her revenge against her husband, now amplified by her victory over those who had tried to break her. "They wanted to make me a monster," she told Tarrant and Chester, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. She flexed her fingers, remembering the feeling of claws, of power finally matching her purpose. "Let's show them what a monster can do." The ritual chamber fell silent as Eleanor surveyed the doctor's empty bodies. Their chests still rose and fell with shallow breaths, but their minds were gone, trapped in Wonderland, just as they had trapped so many others. "What now?" Chester materialized beside her, his presence solid and reassuring despite his shadowy nature. "Now," Eleanor said, "we remake this place. All of it." She closed her eyes, reaching for the power that still hummed through her veins. The ritual scars on her skin glowed with residual energy as she connected to Wonderland's essence. Drawing on Tarrant's lessons, she felt for the malleable edges of reality, those places where will could reshape the world. Tarrant stepped forward, his usual manic energy focused to a sharp point. "The fundamental structures are anchored in the doctor's original ritual. Their consciousness being here gives you unprecedented access to those foundations." Eleanor nodded, already sensing the deep magical architecture that held Wonderland together. Chester had taught her to recognize these patterns, to feel where reality grew thin and where it held firm. Now she could see how the doctors had designed it all to feed on pain and fear, turning suffering into fuel for their barrier. "This was never meant to be just a prison," she said. "They were too short-sighted, too focused on control, But Wonderland can be more, should be more. She reached out with her mind, finding the twisted channels that had carried psychic energy from inmates to the barrier. With surgical precision, she began to alter their purpose. Instead of draining people's essence, these pathways could distribute power, allowing everyone in Wonderland to access their own strength. The air shimmered as reality shifted. Around them, the ritual chamber's stone walls began to soften and change. The cold, clinical space transformed into something organic, living architecture that responded to thought and need. "Help me," Eleanor said to her companions. "Show me where to push, where to pull." Chester moved through shadow, touching points in space where the barrier needed reinforcing. Here, and here, we can maintain the protection without the cruelty. The Bandersnatch remains contained, but not through suffering. Terrence's fractured brilliance provided its own insight. His hands danced through the air, directing flows of power like a conductor leading an impossible orchestra. Yes, yes, let chaos serve creation rather than destruction. Make the madness sing instead of scream. Eleanor felt Wonderland responding, reshaping itself according to her vision. The harvest chambers collapsed, their dark purpose erased. In their place, spaces of healing emerged, gardens where broken minds could find peace, libraries where fractured thoughts could slowly reorder themselves, sanctuaries where the truly damaged could safely express their darkness without harming others. "Where are they?" she asked finally, sensing the doctor's trapped consciousness trying to hide in Wonderland's shadows. Chester smiled his predatory smile. "I can find them. They can't hide in the spaces between thoughts from me." One by one, they drew the doctor's minds out of hiding. Eleanor faced her former tormentors, now stripped of their masks and power, reduced to the frightened creatures they truly were. "Please," one begged, "we were trying to protect the world." "Through torture?" Eleanor's voice cut like ice. "Through stealing people's minds and souls? No. You wanted power, and you didn't care who suffered for it." She crafted their prison with the same careful attention she'd once given to her husband's death. 5 cells, one for each doctor, lined with mirrors that would show them only their own crimes. The walls would weep with tears shed by their victims. The air itself would carry echoes of every scream they had caused. "How does it feel?" Eleanor asked them as the cells sealed shut. "To be the experiment?" Their pleas turned to screams as the doors closed, trapping them in an eternal loop of their own cruelty. They would experience every torture they had inflicted, feel every moment of suffering they had caused, again and again, until time itself ended. Terrence laughed, the sound both joyous and sharp. "Justice is the best medicine, wouldn't you say?" Eleanor turned away from the doctor's prison, focusing instead on the realm that was now hers to shape. Already she could feel Wonderland's citizens, no longer inmates, responding to the changes. Fear gave way to cautious hope as they sensed the shift in power, the transformation of their prison into a sanctuary. "They'll need guidance," Chester observed. "Someone to show them how to use their freedom, their power." "They'll need protection," Terrence added, "from themselves as much as from what lies beyond the barrier." Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight and rightness of her new role. "Then we'll give them both. Together." The realm continued to transform around them. Madness reshaped into magic. Pain turned to power. A prison becoming a kingdom where the broken could finally find their strength. The great hall of what had once been Terrence's estate transformed itself for the coronation. Crystal chandeliers grew from the ceiling like stalactites made of light, their glow reflecting off walls that shifted between mirror-smooth glass and living stone. Every former inmate of Wonderland gathered, their presence filling the space with an electric anticipation. Eleanor stood before them in a gown that defied reality. One moment it appeared to be made of midnight shadows, the next of shattered mirror fragments catching the light. The ritual scars on her skin glowed with power, no longer marks of torture, but badges of triumph. Cordelia stepped forward, carrying 3 crowns she had grown from her impossible garden. The first was woven from thorny roses that bled starlight instead of blood. The second sparked with contained lightning, its spires reaching toward chaos like a mad scientist's dream. The third seemed to exist in multiple places at once, visible only from the corner of one's eye until directly observed. "We gather," Cordelia announced, her voice carrying the weight of ceremony, "to witness the crowning of our Trinity, those who broke the chains, who transformed our prison into paradise, who showed us that our madness is our magic." Eleanor knelt first, her head held high. Cordelia placed the rose crown upon her brow, its thorns drawing pinpricks of blood that transformed into diamonds as they fell. "Rise, Eleanor Ashworth, Queen of Shattered Glass, you who turned torture into transformation, who made monsters into monarchs." Terrence stepped forward next, his usual manic energy focused to laser precision. As Cordelia settled the lightning crown upon his wild hair, electricity crackled through the air. "Rise, Terrent Highmore, King of Chaos, you who sees patterns in madness and beauty in broken things." Chester materialized from shadow, solid enough to kneel, yet still somehow smoke-like at the edges. The crown that existed in multiple places finally settled into one reality as it touched his head. "Rise, Chester Vale, Shadow King, you who guards our boundaries and keeps balance between light and dark." The 3 rulers stood together, power emanating from them in visible waves. Regina approached first, her crimson gown sweeping the floor as she knelt. "I pledge my loyalty," she declared, her former jealousy transformed into fierce respect. "My territory and talents are yours to command, my queen." One by one, the citizens of Wonderland came forward to pledge themselves. The twins, moving in perfect synchronization, took their place as Eleanor's personal guard. Warren stepped up to accept the role of chancellor, his nervous energy now focused on organization rather than anxiety. When the pledges were complete, Eleanor raised her hands. The hall fell silent. "No more will this realm feed on suffering," she proclaimed. "No more will minds be harvested against their will. From this day forward, Wonderland opens its doors only to those who choose it, who seek sanctuary in their darkness rather than false light in their chains." "The boundaries will hold," Chester added, his voice echoing from every shadow. "But they will hold through willing sacrifice and shared strength, not stolen power." "Innovation will flourish," Tarrant declared, his eyes bright with possibility. "We'll create new ways to channel our chaos, to celebrate our beautiful broken pieces." The ceremony transformed into celebration. Reality bent according to the revelers' joy. Flowers bloomed from ceiling beams, music played from nowhere and everywhere, and the very air tasted of freedom. Later that night, Eleanor stood in their shared chambers, a suite that existed in 3 overlapping realities at once, matching their unified yet distinct natures. Terrence organized chaos filled one space with ticking clocks and half-finished inventions. Chester's domain held comfortable shadows and places where reality grew thin. Eleanor's section reflected her crystalline clarity, sharp edges, and perfect order, but with an underlying current of controlled violence. She reached for both her kings, taking their hands. "I choose this," she said firmly. "I choose both of you. The world can bend to accommodate what we are to each other." Terrence's laugh held only joy, no madness. "As if we'd let it be any other way." Chester's smile showed all his teeth. "We've already broken every other rule. Why stop at this one?" Their hands intertwined, 3 pulses beating in synchronized rhythm. Power surged between them, Terrence's chaos, Chester's shadows, Eleanor's steel-sharp clarity, weaving them together in bonds stronger than mere marriage could create. The air crackled with electricity and shadow as they sealed their union with kisses that tasted of fire and devotion. Their bond sang through Wonderland itself, the realm recognizing and celebrating its ruler's unity. Together, they had transformed a prison into a kingdom. Together, they would rule it, not through fear or torture, but through understanding that sometimes the brightest souls wore the darkest shadows, and the deepest madness held the clearest purpose. 6 months had transformed Wonderland beyond recognition. Where chaos once reigned unchecked, now it flowed in purposeful streams, channeled by Eleanor's will and her king's guidance. The gardens bloomed with Cordelia's impossible flowers, their petals changing colors to reflect the emotions of those who passed. The twins patrolled the boundaries, their synchronized movements creating ripples in reality that strengthened rather than weakened the walls between worlds. Eleanor stood before the ornate-looking glass in her private chambers, studying her reflection. The ritual scars traced silvery patterns across her skin, no longer marks of torture, but badges of triumph. Her gown, woven from shadow and starlight, shifted between solid and smoke with each breath. Power radiated from her in visible waves, the kind of power that came from absolute acceptance of one's true nature. Terrence's hand was warm in her left, his presence a controlled storm of brilliant innovation. His own reflection showed a man transformed, still touched by madness, but now it served his genius rather than consumed it. The lightning crown sat askew on his wild hair, exactly as he preferred it. Chester's grip in her right hand was both solid and ethereal, shadow given form by choice rather than necessity. His guardian nature had evolved, protecting their realm through devotion instead of duty. His crown seemed to exist in multiple places at once, much like its wearer. The doctors tried another ritual today, Chester reported, his smile showing sharp teeth. They're still attempting to break free of their prison. Let them try, Eleanor said, satisfaction coloring her tone. Their own guilt feeds the Bandersnatch now. The more they struggle, the stronger our protection grows. Terrence laughed, the sound tinged with dark delight. Poetic justice at its finest. Their suffering maintains the very barrier they sought to control. Eleanor thought of her latest visit to Bedlam, where she'd found a young woman committed for the crime of refusing an arranged marriage. The girl now resided in Cordelia's garden tower, learning to grow flowers from memories and nightmares alike. Another rescued soul, another monster given sanctuary to become their true self. We've created something beautiful, she mused, watching their reflections ripple like water. Not despite our darkness, but because of it. A kingdom built on honest madness, Tarrant agreed, squeezing her hand. Where broken pieces make the strongest foundations, Chester added. Eleanor raised her free hand to touch the glass, feeling the thin membrane between realities. On the other side, she could sense London's streets, the walls of Bedlam, the weight of society's judgments. All those proper ladies in their proper houses, suffering proper torments behind proper smiles. I was supposed to die in chains, she whispered. Or worse, live in them, pretending to be something other than what I am. Instead, I built a throne from the very chains they used to bind me. The looking glass rippled beneath her touch, showing glimpses of other women, trapped in marriages, asylums, expectations. Women whose darkness was labeled madness, whose strength was called hysteria, whose clarity was deemed delusion. Eleanor leaned closer to the glass, her voice carrying power and promise. I built my throne from broken glass and called it home. And if they come for you, you can come to me. The words echoed through both realms, a beacon for those with the courage to embrace their own darkness. In Wonderland, the very air hummed with their truth, reality bending to accommodate their weight. She felt Tarrant and Chester step closer, their unified presence a reminder that she'd not only claimed her power, but found love that celebrated rather than feared it. Their reflection showed three rulers in perfect balance, chaos and shadow and crystalline purpose, each made stronger by the others. With a satisfied smile, Eleanor turned away from the looking-glass, from the world that had tried to break her. She faced her kingdom instead, where the impossible bloomed and monsters wore crowns, where madness and clarity danced as equals in the eternal twilight. Her kings moved with her, three hearts beating in synchronized rhythm as they walked away from the mirror and toward their shared future. Behind them, the looking-glass rippled one final time before settling into stillness, waiting for the next soul brave enough to step through and claim their true nature.